I don't know. I think there's always been enough of you.
Well, you just said there's never enough, so which
True.
is it going to be?
Well,
I mean, make up your mind.
that's
Of course, that's asking a lot of the Gemini. I
right.
realize that.
Okay, yeah, I think this is going to work. So let's just go ahead and start.
Well, you asked me, so let me finish.
Right.
These, to me, they look like any middle-class couple, heterosexual, gay. It didn't make any difference. And they didn't think they were typical. He told me that you can learn to hear yourself. And I'm not, because I'm a little like that, although I can sing blues. I can really, because somewhere I can twist my voice around.
Right.
And it's not bad, it's good, fairly good. And I think you can learn to hear yourself, but I'm not quite sure how. I'll ask him. I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
I think...
Okay, I need you to just talk for a second.
Shut me up, right?
Right.
Okay, you need just me to talk.
That's right.
Okay.
Just you to talk, and get fairly animated, too.
Get fairly animated. What do you want me to do? You want me to wake up and act like, there's something going on here?
There is something going on. You know that.
Is that what you want?
Sure not.
Daffy Duck?
No.
No. Okay, well...
What kind of structure you want? So we start with how you named yourself.
The three things that are most significant that I have the greatest sense of attachment to. One of them is clothing, and the way and the reason I'm involved in clothing.
Okay, let's just start again. But we are ready, so go ahead.
Okay. The three things that I feel the strongest sense of attachment to are, clothing, which is the most, like out in the world, material plane, reality. And it's an expression of something else, and that is myself as a healer. And what the clothing is about, when I'm able to do that which is most clearly and completely me, the one-of-a-kind pieces, what that's about is putting enough of myself out in someone else's life that it can function as a surrogate for me. In the same way that if you know that you will feel good when you wear a certain garment, whether or not it's appropriate, you wear it to a job interview, you're on, you feel good, you get the job. Because you communicate something about yourself because of the impact that the garment has had. In a similar way, it isn't necessary that people know that, this is made by, a colored drag, semi-retired drag queen shaman, in Santa Cruz, and know the whole song and dance. All they have to do is interact with the garment, and it will have whatever impact it will have in their life. And that's a way that, it goes out. Who I am goes out in the world. The third is that as a gay person, as a gay man, or actually I'm more comfortable with the term queer, I don't feel a lot of closeness to all of the assumptions that follow with the word gay. My primary identification of myself is, again, in relation to the concept of healing, is as a temple whore. Someone who, leads the congregation to a greater relationship to God or the goddess or the Godhead or nirvana through, personal, physical, and sometimes sexual interaction, because it creates a ground of sufficient intimacy that I can then have an impact on someone's life.
Do you do it for that reason?
Primarily, yeah.
So it's a sacred act. Sex is a sacred act.
Yeah. I do. There is recreational or social sex in my life. It's not like everybody has to be sized up for sacred potential before there's any sort of possibility of interaction. But since I took vows as a temple whore, despite all of my fears around it, I've never had so little sex or enjoyed it so much. It's become much more a thing that evolves when it's supposed to, rather than I'm horny tonight, I want to go get some. And it's created a very different reality in my life.
What about the second one, healing? What kind of active healing do you do?
Primarily, It isn't healing so much in the physical plane, although I've had some people respond to me around my hands and feeling like, having my hands upon them has been supportive or helpful, in dealing with, physical level things that have been going on for them. Primarily, it's about issues of growth and development, and I tend to come into people's lives at a time when they're going through major transition, and because I'm such a mercurial individual, I've been through so many transitions myself, I tend to have a sense of what it's about and what's needed and how to get through it and help people through that. I call myself a psychic midwife. You've still got to do the pushing, but I can keep you breathing, and keep you on rhythm.
It's going to be hard for me to keep from laughing out loud. Yeah, I'm that way too, as a matter of fact. I always know when they need help.
Right.
And if I can give it, I can give it, and then they drive me crazy. I say, go and breathe.
Right.
Go and breathe.
Right.
All right. So those are the three ways that he heals. Okay. The first is the clothing is surrogate Gryphon. The second is healing directly, probably by talking, but also by touch. And the third way is by, in a sacred context, doing what is needed physically. This does not always mean sexually. Okay,
Right.
All clear. All right. So, is this associated with your name? It sounds as if it is. Could you explain?
Gryphon.
Yeah. Go say how you chose. First of all, because I'm cutting me out of here.
Okay.
So you got to say how you chose the name. In other words, all I'm saying is cutouts. Okay.
Gryphon Blackswan is a name that I chose with a fair amount of consciousness. Black Swan came a little bit later. Gryphon was first. When I started doing a spiritual practice called shamanic journeying, which is essentially going inward and setting my spirit or soul free to travel to the places where the answers are. The things that I already know the answers to the question, but I'm not aware of it. What I found was the being that was my guide was Gryphon. And it went from being a light to eventually resolving into Gryphon. And as I thought about that longer, I realized that, the guide in shamanic journeying is not some other. I mean, it's not an other being. It's an aspect of myself that I trust to be wise. And if the part of myself that I trust to be wise is Gryphon, then, it seemed appropriate that that's who I was, that's who I am, and that's the name that I wanted.
A Gryphon is a mammal that flies, is that right?
A Gryphon is a combination, a composite animal. Depending upon what culture you go to, it's put together in different ways, but it generally includes both the body and sometimes the head of a lion, and the wings and sometimes the head of an eagle. The earring that I wear is my preferred image of Gryphon, the head of a lion and the body of an eagle. And it was assumed to be, since it's both creatures of the land and of the air, it was thought to be a conduit for the power of the sun to mankind, which is one of the reasons why it shows up as one form of gargoyle, for example, in medieval architecture. It's not only this ferocious being that will scare off evil spirits, also using it up at the top of a building was logical if it's indeed a being that transmits power to mankind from the sun.
It's interesting. I have two totems, one owl and one bear. Probably snake is the third.
Mm-hmm.
All three. Well, you spoke about being a shaman. How do you use the Gryphon as your guide to lead? I assume you lead people on journeys. Is that right? Do you use a drum?
No, generally what what I have found is the number of people in my life who are ready to approach a very structured process like shamanic journeying don't really need the person that I am. I mean, they've already gained access to a pathway that will provide them with far more direction and support than I can. So the people that I'm usually interacting with are at a point where they either are not yet ready to embrace concepts like shamanic journeying or even, the idea of shamanic healing. They simply recognize and speak about seeing in me a level of quiet, a level of certainty or confidence that they believe in. And so it's much more a matter of using my own life as an example to speak from, about how I've dealt with similar situations or what I see in that situation, to provide a wider range of options for them in making their choices. So I don't use, in most cases, with the people that I'm in interaction with, I don't use real conscious shamanic practice in interaction with people. Because if they're there, as I say,
Yeah.
I'm irrelevant at that point.
They're also asking you.
Right.
Okay, I bet you have a question. I have one too, but I think you want.
Well, actually, I'm preoccupied for a moment. Let me just move the microphone because we're getting slight not flared, but on occasion you touch the necklace and it sort of rattles.
Ah, okay.
I hear it rattling.
Why don't you must be curious about something. So I know I have other questions. I'm not through, but I think you want to ask something, so you do it.
Why don't you do some more? Because now I think I can be a little bit less distracted by the sound noise. I don't think about it.
All right, I hear you. It's all very interesting. It's really one-on-one then that you provide a role model, essentially, because you've lived fully. You provide a role model for people in trouble so that they could be brave enough to embrace their own journeys.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. It's a twofold thing. Number one, and this plugs into where the second name, Blackswan, comes in. I spent most of my childhood and early adulthood thinking of myself as a particularly unattractive individual. I was overweight, wore Coke bottle glasses, and uncoordinated, couldn't play sports, was the wrong color for the communities I lived in, and the whole 9 yards. And somewhere around 33, 34, the mirrors started saying nicer things to me. So it was like this sense of, in the middle of my life, having moved into a realm of, being an attractive individual. And it led me to recognize that when I looked back, a lot of what was unattractive about the person I was not my physical characteristics. It was my perception of myself. And so to take the image of a swan and, starting out an ugly duckling and then becoming this incredibly graceful creature, and to use that with other people in terms of, whatever your stuff, whatever your images, whatever your problems about yourself, recognize that you too are a swan, and if you can get past, seeing, assuming you're wrong, assuming you're ugly, assuming that you're stupid, assuming all this stuff, then, you can get on with it too. Right.
Well, first time I saw you, I thought you were a great-looking guy. I always did. I said that to him because I saw you in the garden, and I said, "That's the most elegant man I've seen in my life." That's the truth. It's the truth. I said it. So,
Well,
but it
thank
is
you.
the perception. It's also I felt it too. I think almost all the interesting people I've ever met in my life have felt it at the beginning.
Yeah.
Either they died in the process, somewhere
Right.
along the line.
Right.
If they
Right.
survived, they became very
Right.
interesting.
Right.
If they survived.
Well,
Because
you
what they latched on to something else. They latched on to a deeper strata of living because of the pain.
Well,
Yeah.
see, and that's the thing. No matter, everybody that I have known in my life that I've developed a strong sense of connection to, either, on a personal peer relationship or, someone who I've had some sort of supportive or healing relationship with. Consistently, are people who are, quote, exceptional. Now, maybe it's that everyone is exceptional, and it just takes some of us more to realize it or to admit to it. I know I spent a long time recognizing a lot about myself, but being fearful of giving into it, fearful of letting it take over my life, fearful that I would become one of those weird people, that I was going to be running around in bizarre places doing all sorts of weird religious practice and so on and so forth. Well, and guess what? I have, and, and I love it. And with most people, we're real resistant of letting go of thinking of ourselves as normal. And that if you aren't willing to let go of that, then you can't become the extraordinary person you are.
I always thought of myself as absolutely not normal. That's the truth. I always have. No kidding. From the time I was about a kid, 1 year old, 2 year old. Mm-hmm. What am I doing in this family? That's true. That's really true. It's but you change. You change mm-hmm. radically. Mm-hmm. I too changed my name, mm-hmm. but it didn't hold. But I had dreams of getting off the train in Cheyenne and starting with a new name, starting a new life. Cheyenne, such a wonderful place, right? Anyway, yeah. No, I think complex people have a very hard time. Mm-hmm. My sons have a very hard time. It's really, it's almost sorry, Although I'm not, that's the gift of life is something, and hopefully they'll come to something. But it's very hard to be this complex and live. Mm-hmm. Even if you're born to good folks, it's very hard. All right, now that we've gone through that, and we're all exceptional, and we all feel very good, you had a question.
Well, it's interesting that you just I was just thinking, well, what does this have to do with attachments? Because it sounds like basically you're saying you're not attached.
But he has. Mm-hmm. What he has said, he's attached on a sacred plane.
Right.
And a physical plane through his clothing.
Right. But
those are his attachments. And also to be a temple whore.
Right. Well, they're connections, but they're not. When most people think of attachments, they think of need type, coming out of a position of need.
This is not the kind of brains.
And
this is not my kind of brains. It's his. Good.
And and that's something that it's always been very clear to me that you didn't, which is partly what's so great.
Well, let's put it this way. In terms of thinking of these things as attachments, one of the things that I'm very clear about is that my sewing machine is my refuge. My sewing machines, plural. There are several more scattered around in here, in boxes and cabinets. Just been through a rough period in my life emotionally, discovering that a relationship that I thought was going to be significant, has come to an end. And what I did with that was go to the sewing machine. I disappeared into the sewing machine. That's my way of dealing with emotional trauma, is if I'm not at a point where I can process it and move on and let go of it, then the way that I idle in a way that isn't self-destructive or, puts me in a worse state than I was before is by sewing. And what comes out of that is a form of alchemy that has become very, very integral to my life. I mean, there are clothes in here that were created at times when I was in incredible emotional trauma and turmoil and distress. So, and I find that when I'm too long away from the sewing machine, I get crazy. I mean, I really get crazy. I need it. I mean, I do indeed need it. Now, and developing a career in clothing has been a way of keeping me in my therapy. I'm getting paid for my therapy rather than having to pay someone else to do it for me. The other thing is that, it's a way of keeping my hands busy. I mean, I go to fairy gatherings and everybody's out having a wonderful time. I'm sitting knitting, madly away. I mean, I've got this thing about doing something with my hands. So on that level, it's very much an attachment for me. As far as my sense of myself as a shaman, whether in more abstract, relationships or in a sexual plane. It's very much a sense of an anchor, a root. I mean, a way that I keep myself, it's like a gyroscope for me, in that I can look at a situation and, it's particularly useful when I'm curious about my motives around my sexual attraction to someone. If I'm wondering, how healthy is this? What's going on here? All I have to do is ask myself, are either of us going to grow here? And then I know the answer. Now that's not to say that sometimes I go, neither of us is going to grow and I'm going to have fun, but at least I'm doing it consciously and without any sort of delusion about it. I'm not looking for relationship. I'm not, exploring the possibility of this, that, or the other. I'm recognizing that, this is a real specific desire that I have now. So I use that connection, that identification of myself as very much as a gyroscope in my life.
You're grounded.
Mm-hmm.
Grounded. That's the point. So essentially, it's not too different from Brindle.
Yeah.
It's the same. She's grounded too.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the drum that made her
Mm-hmm.
grounded.
Mm-hmm.
With you, it's the sewing machine or your faith,
Mm-hmm.
because you do have faith.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about faith, your kind?
Oh, sure.
I think that would be interesting.
Faith is such a difficult word to discuss. It means so many different things to different people. For me, it's a recognition that I'm a part of a continuum of people. It starts out, the human condition, and then starts narrowing down, not in an exclusive way, but a more and more particular way. There are more specific aspects of who I am. And I have had it demonstrated to me over and over again that when there is not a significant and central role in my life for the concept of service and being in service to my community, that everything just goes nuts. It just gets weird. Mm-hmm. And I've never, well, I won't say never, I grew up in a very strong Baptist and therefore Christian tradition, but stepped away from that at a fairly early age. Found it very excessively defined and specific. It didn't have enough room for what I was seeing and what I was experiencing. And I don't have a sense of God in the specific, God or goddess looks this way, or God's name is this, or the goddess's name is Hecate or Inanna, or, whoever. But very much a very, very strong belief that there is an organizing principle, whether I want to call it the Godhead or God, or just leave it at an organizing principle that is, for me, anchored in the process of people interacting with one another and being supportive with one another. And that when I serve that, when I assist that, when I help that, my life just unfolds. I don't have to make decisions. I don't have to figure things out. I don't have to make tough judgment calls. It just keeps, all I have to do is keep putting one foot in front of the other. And when I pull back and start trying to make abstract, rational, logical, common sense decisions, it just goes to hell in a handbasket. And I always wind up in circumstances that I won't say regret, but I don't find supportive of me. And when I accept that I'm a gifted individual on a number of levels, I'm talented in a variety of different ways, and I'm attractive enough that even if it isn't a sexual connection, that people want to be with me, they want to somehow or another be connected, be a part of my life, and that if I get weird with all of that and turn it into I'm so great and I'm so wonderful and, I'm this and I'm that and you're down there, then it goes really weird. If I use all of that as doorways for being in interaction with people and being supportive to people and giving people an opportunity to support me, then it works. So my faith is that if I am in service to my community, that I'm where I'm supposed to be, rather than a specific structure of, religious principles or dogma.
It's almost as though you're a priest. That's what I feel in your own way, that you're a priest. It's a urbanistic. You call it a temple whore, but
Right.
it's the same thing.
Right.
It ends up
Exactly.
the same place. Well, you got another
He
question?
just leaves me speechless.
Well, he speaks in whole paragraphs, man. This is the first person who's spoken in paragraphs. No
Well,
kidding.
this is why I wanted you to interview him.
He's good. He's good. I understand where you are exactly. I could tell you some stories, but I'm not here to tell you stories. Are you happy? That's what I want to know. You're not happy now, but you're still rocking through a tough time. But I imagine that when you're happy, you're very happy. You're assuming the burden's an awful lot of people,
No, I'm not.
You're not really?
I'm not assuming the burdens of anyone because, as I said, in my relationships with anyone where I consider myself to be supportive, I'm very, very clear. I have a background of training as a Rogerian psychotherapist, so I have a very strong academic root in I'm not my client. I'm real clear about that. Now, I can be with someone who's hurting. I can feel the degree to which they're in pain when we are together, and I can feel empathy and pain and sorrow that they face the issues they face, but they are their issues. I can, in some situations, provide them with information or perspective or observation that might be helpful in dealing with it, but it's still their stuff. I mean, it's back to the midwife imagery again. You're going to have to push that baby out of there. I can't do it. You've got to do the pushing, but I can keep you breathing. And as far as whether or not I'm happy, there are two ways in which I answer that question, two levels. One is, the sort of moment-to-moment, what's my, current emotional mood or state. Right now there's a lot of turmoil in my life. I'm approaching the death of a very, very, very dear and beloved friend, and it really gets to me. And there are times when that just sort of sweeps through and like a Scirocco and just leaves me devastated and sewing. I'm calming down about dealing with my own issues around being seropositive, asymptomatic, but, I'm on what for many people has been, an express ticket out of here, through HIV and AIDS. I believe, as my doctor does, that, I'm going to be one of the people who gets to the other side of this. And there's also the fact that I may not. I mean, and if I don't, well, then I'm not supposed to. But those things do indeed weigh on my mind. They are things that come up that have to be dealt with. The other level for me in terms of the question of am I happy has to do with something that I would label more as joy. There's a level of joy that I feel on an ongoing basis, even when I'm pissed off, angry, when I'm, ready to rip somebody's head off, when I'm feeling like, will I ever stop playing Billie Holiday because I've got the blues so bad? Because I know I am exactly where I am supposed to be in this life. I am who I am, and I'm the fullest expression I can be of who I am. And the biggest thing that I do whether it's speaking to the community about what it means to be living with AIDS and HIV, whether it's talking to individuals in my life about, helping them deal with issues they're facing, whether it is, holding a man in my arms because he needs to be held, and that's the way to reassure him about, how extraordinary a person he is. No matter what it is that I'm doing, the best that I can do is to live my life the best that I can in the public domain. And that's what my life is about. So when I know that I'm who I am and that I'm on my path, there's a level of joy that's sustaining. I may not be happy in this given moment, but I'm always joyful.
You really do talk in paragraphs. That's wonderful. I think he's, as far as I'm concerned, I think he's covered it all. Do you think you've covered it all? Do you want to talk about something else?
That pretty much does it for me.
I think you're really there. Yeah, I think it's fine. What about you? You want to ask a question? I think there's something in your mind.
I'm trying to think of what it is. I was going to say, if you're going to look for a relationship, what will you look for? But you're not really looking. Which is what's interesting.
Well, no, I'm not looking for relationship. I do have relationships in place currently. I mean, there are a number of people with whom I have ongoing relationships that I consider committed, in that I have a commitment to, our presence together in relationship. The one that is the most central in my life is someone else who identifies himself as a shaman, and with whom I have a relationship that is very much that of two peers, two individuals who are in very different ways, but doing the same work, and our tribes overlap, but, they're not exactly the same. There are a number of other relationships that are very important to me, mean an awful lot to me. When most people say relationship, they generally tend to have an assumption of romance built into that. And one of the things that I'm learning for me is that relationship more and more is not necessarily about romance and sex. It is about physical intimacy. There are a number of men in my life with whom I'm very physically intimate. We sleep together, we cuddle, we play with one another, and may or may not have ever had what I or anyone else would call sex. There are also people with whom I do have sex, but it isn't all that frequent. I mean, it isn't a real big part of our relationship. As far as relationship more on the level of mate or lover or partner, no, I'm not looking. There are things that I would like. There are things that I miss, having had mates before, that I'm very aware don't exist. There's a level of being known that's present in a really good relationship that I miss. Public creature that I am, I'm also very, very private. And there are very few people that get to that inner level of knowledge of me. And I really cherish that. And the people who have gotten the deepest with me have been the people who have been my mate. And I miss that. I really miss that. What I recognize is necessary for me to even entertain that notion is that it must be someone who is sufficiently engaged and active and rewarded in their own life that our relationship, our connection, is an expansion of an existing well-lived life, not a completion of his life. That's when you get into carrying someone's burdens and that kind of thing. if a man comes along who is living a very well-lived life and holds the possibility of his life expanding through a relationship with me, then we've got a possibility to explore. But as far as looking for him,
You know what it is? You're actually standing by an open door. That's what the image I have. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking that you're standing by an open door, and that's very rare. I haven't met many people who do that. It's nice.
thank you.
You're welcome.
As opposed to scampering after.
No. I don't.
No, I know what you mean.
What I mean is, and I don't even know what I mean, but it's like there's another level of experience that can be called on at any point if he wants it.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. That's what I mean. I am really through unless you have something. I think he's given you everything.
I think so too.
And you did. Thank you very much. I think you're extraordinary. Not only are you a very elegant man, I think you're an extraordinary one. I learned a lot. Actually, if these things are good, I do learn every time. That will be one of the most valuable ones we have.
And why don't you two just talk for a minute? Because I want to get some close-ups of you flipping your hands around.
Sure.
Well, now we can relax and talk.
All right,
Okay,
that's
all
right.
right.
All
Okay.
right.
Wow.
I am psychic in a very limited way, but I am. I can read people. And I sort of know time spans and stuff. I do know that. You know, most people, they don't know. I don't always tell them. I can always also tell degrees of health. I can't. That's very strange. I can tell. I just read faces and bodies and the whole trip. I do it. So it's on a very low level of knowing. And that's what I've got. It's also, I sort of know what people need. That's interesting too.
That's an interesting one because I run into that, and I still have trouble with when knowing comes to me through non-standard channels. I have a tendency to hesitate and to not trust it.
You have to because it's a big deal.
And yet there are times when I'm with someone and it just poof, a fully formed concept of what's
like
needed.
That image of the door, for instance, you standing
exactly,
by the door, the open
door.
Not ready to go up, but almost side by side or tilted a little bit and the door is there. Yeah, no, you got to trust that because it's the best part of you. I mean, this stuff just comes to me. I saw my brother-in-law on the beach and I said, my God, he's going to die. He had epileptic seizures, never had epileptic seizure, and I looked at him, or I saw a woman on the beach and I didn't even recognize her. I said, that's not the same woman, brain tumor. And it's like, I know. That's all. I just know. And I'll sometimes worry a great deal about a person and try and tell that person, you know, you've got to take care of yourself. Or I'll hear it by the voice. I can hear the energy in the voice. I think you're a pretty lucky man, you know. All in all, I think you're complete.
Well, see, that's the thing that I remember the first time that I thought I was on my way to a doctor and would hear, you know, that I had AIDS or, you know, was seropositive.
I think it'll be okay. One way or another, I think it'll be okay. Because, you see, I don't think it's so much anyway. It's like, if you've done what you got to do, you'll be okay.
Well, see, that's it.
Yeah.
Because I knew on my way there, as it turned out on that trip, that it was a bruise that I thought was KS. You know, a few days later, it was green and ugly and so on. But the thing that was real clear to me was that I was living my life exactly as I needed to be living it, and even if I came back with the knowledge that I was seropositive, I didn't need to change anything.
That's good. That's right.
And in a similar way, when I did find out, yes, I am seropositive, you know, there was a real clear sense that there are things in my life that I'm already aware of, that I want to change, that I want to be different, and I'm working on making them different, but there's nothing that I need to change because of this news. And so it's with a sense of, you know, I just keep putting one foot in front of the other, and as long as I keep doing that is how long I do it. And when I don't, then I don't. And
No, the all gets recycled anyway.
Right. I mean, there's no place I need to get to because I'm me. I'm here.
Yeah, and that
I'm who and where I need to be, so...
The energy is, nothing is created or destroyed, either physical matter or spiritual matter. It just doesn't. It goes on. In different form, the individual gets lost, but so what? I mean, that's not terribly important. You're not lost,
No. I mean, it's like my image of one of the metaphors that I use for all the changes in my life is that of the phoenix.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I keep reminding myself is just because I'm a phoenix doesn't mean that the flames are going to stop burning. But it does mean that, descend into the flames I will, but, rise again I will as well.
Yes.
And, and each time I rise again, it's going to be something different.
The flight is higher.
Right. And one of these times, it's going to be a descent and ascent that leaves me, or leads me into a different body, a different life. And, I mean, that's no different than, getting fired from my job at a corporate environment and going through the financial turmoil and coming out the other side with a commitment to be an artist. I mean, it was hell to be unemployed and broke and not knowing how I was going to pay the rent. Still not know how I'm going to pay the rent. But what came out of that was a recognition that I'm an artist. And when the time comes that I check out of this, well then, I check out and it'll be time to find out what's next.
I heard some Tibetan monks chant, the lamas, and they took me on a trip, and I died. And I knew what dying was like. It wasn't too pleasant. It wasn't a pretty trip. And then I went and saw a bright light, and then I marched, and then I sat down and waited. And it was obvious what this was all about. And they knew the people in the audience who had, in other words, there was direct contact between the head lama and the people of the audience. There were other people dreamt of food, or this or that, to the degree that they could go. I was so fucking needy. I went the whole way. I had to have it. I had to have it. It was obvious. I didn't even know I had to have it.
Right.
But somebody took me, said, you got to go. And I said, well, But, yeah, that helped me a lot. Because I have much fear in me, I think. But what's interesting to me is, I had this big uproar at work with this woman who really wanted to leave the place. And it's called a crossing. And a big deal, The crossing comes, and it's the crossing for everybody.
Right.
That's out of the I Ching. And she was there.
Right.
And she really didn't want to stay anymore, but it's a very comfortable place. It's like Mama and Papa.
Right.
And the whole shillelagh or whatever it is, the whole enchilada. And she had to go. So she kicked up such a fucking uproar, I had to fire her. And then we had to figure out how we'd continue the relationship without the business, how I could hire her freelance to do paintings. And that's all worked out. But first she came back. She wanted to work some more. Even though I fired her, she still wanted to work there. And so I finally said, you have to give me your key. It's not legal. I used that as an excuse that she couldn't work there because it wasn't legal.
Right.
But anyway, it worked out. And I said, the work you did since you've been fired has been the most extraordinary. It's true. The most extraordinary you've ever done. You're going to be fine. And she left, and everything's fine. But this has been 1 week of total uproar until I read it. And read it solidly in about 4 intervals. I read this much, and then I read this much. Who's holding a gun to my head? Either you give me a $5 hourly raise, or I'm going to go. I'm in the middle of a big season. I said, well, maybe I ought to give it to her. Then I said, she's not talking about $5 raises. She's talking about, she really doesn't want it here anymore. She doesn't want the teamwork of the people here. So first I show her that she really owes a lot of people, including me, in the terms of the art, because I do know art. I'm good. I had to do it all the way until finally it was clear between her and me. But it took all that time. It was very funny, but that's my life. It's not like yours. Yours is cleaner. Mine is, it's like when the time I did LSD. It was struggle until I got there. But I got there, and I'm sure of it. When I red jewel in the middle of my chest.
Right.
I really mean getting there.
Right.
The entire length.
Right.
Anyway, that's my story. That tells you exactly where I am.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the helper.
Mm-hmm.
Along the way, I'm the cane.
Well, there's an awful lot of people who, one of the people who was most significant in my taking the steps to finally, declare myself as an artist is someone who is a teacher. He used to operate the video production program at Portland Community College. And a program that is reputed enough that, he's had students like Barbara Walters' daughter and so on and so forth make it through. Someone from within the industry recognizing the program, indicates that he was doing a pretty good job. Well, he's one of those people who teaches with a sharp stick. There are those who are very supportive and very loving and, so on and so forth. And I tend to lean in that direction, although I can I can do a jab when it's necessary. But that's not the perspective that I generally begin from. But he at one point just basically took, a pole about this big and sharpened it down, to a razor point and just kept jabbing me in the butt until I jumped off the cliff. And and that's just how he is around that. There are people who help people through creating pain and discomfort and and the release that often comes from that. So, there's all different models.
All different types.
Yeah.
All you have to do is to say that you want to do good in your life. For me, it can't be the primary aim. I do it on the side.
Mm-hmm.
I really do it. I try it on the side all the time. And it works. It works. It leads for a happier daily life.
Mm-hmm.
It does.
It certainly does.
It does.
I can attest to that.
Okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Yay!
Bravo.